The year is 1890, and eastern Kentucky lies buried beneath a fog so dense it feels intentional. It gathers in the hollows like a living judgment, muting sound and swallowing distance. In Black Mars Holler, isolation is not merely geography, it is inheritance. Trails disappear without warning, and the forest closes behind those who enter as if sealing a wound. Outsiders rarely pass through, and when they do, they learn quickly that curiosity is unwelcome. The mountains reward silence and punish attention. Entire families live and die here without records, without witnesses, without interference. Time moves differently, slower and heavier, marked not by calendars, but by seasons and survival. In places like this, secrets do not need to be hidden. They are protected by distance, by habit, by the unspoken agreement that what happens beyond the ridge is not meant to be known. And for decades, something unspeakable thrived in that protection. Miles away, Justice Elias Thorne sits in his circuit office, surrounded by dust-stained files and the quiet clutter of a man devoted to order. He is not a man of instinct or superstition. He believes truth is mechanical, that it lives in ledgers, in margins, in what is missing rather than what is present. On his desk lies a census report submitted by Abel Fry, a young census taker meticulous enough to notice when things did not align. The report describes a property in Black Mars Holler occupied by 4 brothers who refused entry. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the doorway, blocking the interior entirely. They answered questions politely but without warmth, their words measured and oddly synchronized. Fry recorded their names but noted he could not verify the number of occupants. Before leaving, he glimpsed a pale face in a high attic window, gone in an instant. That single line troubles Thorne more than the refusal itself. Thorne reads the report again, then reaches for another document, a mercantile ledger borrowed from the nearest general store. The Rodenbeck brothers appear in it with clockwork regularity, twice a year, always in autumn. They sell carved tools and produce so flawless it looks unnatural, apples without blemish, turnips massive and uniform. The store owner, Jessup, added notes in his own hand. The brothers never brought women or children. They never spoke unless spoken to. They flinched visibly when infants cried nearby. But it is their purchases that unsettle Thorne most. Over several years they bought excessive quantities of lye, lamp oil, iron polish, and heavy iron bolts, far more than any farming household would require. Enough lye to strip flesh from bone, enough bolts to secure doors meant never to open from the inside. No wolves live in Black Mars Holler anymore. The explanation does not fit. A third document completes the pattern. It is a testimonial recorded by the wife of a traveling preacher and submitted quietly to the county clerk. Her husband attempted to visit the Rodenbeck cabin to offer prayer. The brothers met him on the porch, scrubbed so clean it felt hostile. They refused him entry with calm politeness that felt like a warning. Later, the preacher told his wife he felt a godless chill emanating from the house, a wrongness that had nothing to do with weather. He described the brothers as moving in unison, their gestures mirrored, their voices flat and identical in tone. He said it felt like speaking to a single creature wearing 4 faces. He never returned to the holler and warned others to avoid it. Thorne spreads the documents before him. None describe a crime. Together, they describe concealment. And concealment, Thorne knows, is rarely innocent. Thorne writes a single line in his personal case log, his pen moving slowly and deliberately. Rodenbeck family, Black Mars Holler, suspected concealment of occupants, evidence of isolation and evasion. He does not file the papers away. Instead, he leaves them visible on his desk, where they demand attention. Thorne has learned over years of quiet service that evil rarely announces itself. It hides in routine, in silence, in the absence of scrutiny. He decides to ride to the holler himself under the pretense of a land survey dispute. Men who hide do not challenge authority that appears mundane. He prepares a false claim, a map, and a small brown notebook. He tells no one his true purpose. Whatever he finds, he knows, will require steadiness, not spectacle. Somewhere in Black Mars Holler, a record exists that was never meant to be read. The fog is thick the morning Thorn rides out, swallowing the road until it feels like he is moving through nothing at all. The trail narrows as he descends into the hollow, trees pressing close, their branches skeletal and dripping. No birds sing. Even his horse seems uneasy, its hooves muffled by damp earth. When the Rodenbeck cabin emerges from the fog, it feels less discovered than revealed. It is larger than expected, 2 stories of dark timber with a single stone chimney. The porch is scrubbed unnaturally clean. Before Thorn can knock, the door opens. All 4 brothers stand in the doorway, shoulder to shoulder. They do not smile. Silas, the eldest, steps forward and asks Thorn's business in a flat, measured voice. Thorn explains the land dispute, unfolding his map slowly, watching their faces. There is no confusion, no surprise. Silas recites prop, earthy boundaries from memory with mechanical precision. Thorn scans the clearing as they speak. There are no toys, no laundry, no sign of women or children. Everything is orderly, sterile, scrubbed to the point of erasure. Near the side of the cabin, a fire pit draws his attention. The ash around it is blackened and smooth as though used often. A corner of paper, charred and brittle, peeks from the ash. Thorn interrupts Silas with a question, steps closer, and confirms what his instincts already know. It is handwritten, names, lines, circles. He does not touch it. He does not need to. The brothers turn back to him in unison, their movements synchronized in a way that makes Thorn's skin crawl. He thanks them, tips his hat, and leaves. As he mounts his horse, he scuffs ash over the exposed paper with his boot, hiding it from the wind. That night, he returns with Deputy Callum, a man chosen because he asks no questions. They retrieve the charred page carefully and examine it under lamplight. It is a family tree, but unlike any Thorn has ever seen. The lines do not branch outward, they fold inward. Brothers connected to sisters, generations looping back upon themselves, 6 layers deep. This is not genealogy, it is intention. Thorn feels his hands tremble as he traces the ink. He secures a warrant. Weeks pass before the warrant is signed. Weeks during which Thorn sleeps poorly, haunted by looping lines and imagined faces in the dark. When the judge finally signs the order, his handwriting shakes. He writes in the margin that he fears what the law will find more than what it will fail to find. Thorn returns to Black Mars Hollow with Deputy Callum on a grey December morning. 2 of the brothers work near a fence line. They do not protest when Thorn reads the warrant aloud. They simply watch. Inside the cabin, the smell hits first, lie so strong it burns the throat, mixed with something sour and human. The main room is spotless, no personal items, no signs of life beyond the 4 men. Then Thorn looks up. Dark stains spread across the ceiling boards. Above them, a narrow attic hatch framed in iron. 3 heavy bolts secure it from the outside. There is no handle on the inside. This door was not meant to keep something out. It was meant to keep something in. When the bolts are struck free, the sound echoes like thunder. Air rushes down from the attic, thick with decay and despair. A faint whimper follows. Thorn climbs the ladder first. In the attic, 3 women sit chained to the floor, skeletal and pale. Behind them, 11 children huddle in the darkness, twisted and silent. The walls are covered in tally marks, thousands of them, carved into the wood, days counted, years survived. A cedar chest holds a leather-bound ledger. It records everything: births, pairings, deaths, purity, flaws, 6 generations of blood folding back on itself. What happened here was not madness, it was system, it was belief. Doctors later confirm what the ledger already proves. The children bear deformities consistent with generations of inbreeding. The sisters testify. One speaks of schedules, of days assigned, of obedience enforced with chains and starvation. The brothers show no remorse. 2 are hanged, 2 die in prison. The cabin burns a year later, reduced to ash and stone. No investigation follows. The ledger is sealed in the archives. The fog returns to Black Mars Hollow, but the record remains. Evil thrives in silence, and silence, once broken, never truly returns. The trial that followed drew people from counties that had never paid attention to Black Mars Hollow before. They came not out of curiosity alone, but disbelief. The idea that something so ordered, so prolonged, could exist unnoticed unsettled them more than violence ever could. The courtroom felt heavy, as though the walls themselves understood what would be spoken inside them. When the ledger was entered into evidence, its weight seemed to pull the air downward. Page after page was read aloud, each entry colder than the last. Dates, names, outcomes, no emotion, no hesitation, just records. The prosecution did not need theatrics. The facts carried their own brutality. By the third day, spectators stopped whispering. By the fifth, many stopped coming at all. There are some truths people prefer not to witness once they understand them fully. When Tamar, the eldest sister, was brought to the stand, the room shifted. She walked slowly, supported on both sides, her body weakened by decades of confinement. She did not cry. She did not dramatize. She spoke plainly as someone who had rehearsed these words for years in silence. She described how the system was explained to her by her parents before their deaths, how purity was framed as obedience, how refusal was punished not only with pain but with threats against her younger sisters and children. She explained the schedule calmly, naming days of the week as if reciting chores. When asked about the tally marks, she said they helped her remember she was still alive. That time was still passing, even if her life was not. When she finished, no one moved. The defense had little to offer. There was no denial of facts, only justification. Silas Rodenbeck took the stand and spoke with the same measured calm Thorne had observed from the beginning. He did not deny the chains, he did not deny the children, he spoke instead of duty, of blood, of separation from a corrupt world. He said suffering was necessary, that obedience mattered more than comfort. When asked if he understood his sister's pain, he paused briefly before answering. He said pain was temporary, purity was eternal. That sentence settled over the courtroom like ash. Any remaining doubt evaporated in that moment. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Sentencing followed swiftly. Silas and Malachi, identified as the primary enforcers of the system, were condemned to hang. Hezekiah, H. and Jubal received life sentences. None of the brothers reacted. They stood silently as the words were read, their faces unchanged, as though judgment itself were merely another formality. Outside the courthouse, no one celebrated. There was no relief, only exhaustion. People returned home quietly, carrying the weight of knowledge they had never wanted. Justice had been served, but nothing felt restored. Some things, once revealed, cannot be undone by punishment alone. They leave scars not just on victims, but on those who learn how long they looked away. The executions were carried out months later in the prison yard. County records noted the event with clinical brevity, weather conditions, time of death, confirmation of completion. There were no speeches, no final words worth recording. Hezekiah died years later, of illness. Jubal followed soon after. His cause of death listed simply as heart failure. The sisters and children were relocated quietly to a private facility out of state. Their location was never made public. Doctors documented their conditions. Some children would never speak. Some would never walk. Healing, if it came at all, would take forms no court could order. The county paid for their care. It was the least it could do. A year after the trial, the Rodenbeck cabin burned to the ground. The fire was thorough, consuming timber and memory alike. Only the stone chimney remained, standing alone like a marker no one wanted. No investigation was opened. No cow. SE officially recorded. Some said lightning. Others said locals. Thorne suspected intention, but he did not pursue it. The cabin no longer mattered. The record did. The ledger was sealed and placed in the state archives, accessible only by court order. Thorne visited it once before it disappeared behind locked doors. He did not open it again. He had already read enough. Black Mars Hollow returned to silence. The fog still gathers there, just as thick, just as patient. Travelers still avoid it. Locals still lower their voices when speaking its name. But something has changed. The secret no longer belongs to the mountains alone. It exists now in ink, in testimony, in memory, proof that isolation can rot belief into ritual, proof that evil does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it keeps records. Sometimes it waits for decades, confident no one will come looking, and sometimes, when it is finally found, it leaves behind a question more unsettling than the answers it provides. How many other hollers are still quiet? Justice Thorne did not speak of the case often after it ended. In the years that followed, colleagues noticed he grew quieter, more deliberate, as if every word now carried weight. He continued his work with the same precision, but something fundamental had shifted. He had always believed evil revealed itself through chaos, through impulsive violence or visible cruelty. What the Rodenbeck case taught him was far worse. Evil could be orderly. It could be disciplined. It could wake at dawn, keep schedules, record details, and believe itself righteous. That understanding lingered with him longer than any courtroom testimony. At night, he sometimes dreamed of ledgers that never ended, pages turning themselves, names repeating until meaning dissolved into pattern. He never returned to Blackmar's Hollow. He did not need to. It had followed him home in quieter ways. The tally marks haunted him most. Thousands of them carved into wood by a woman who had nothing left but counting. Each mark represented a day survived, not lived. Thorne calculated once that 10,000 days amounted to more than 27 years, nearly 3 decades measured not by birthdays or seasons, but by endurance. That realization unsettled him more than chains or bolts. Chains could be removed, doors could be opened, but time could not be returned. What had been taken from those women could never be restored. The court could punish the guilty, but it could not undo the erasure of ordinary life. That truth sat heavily with Thorne. Justice, he realized, was not the same as repair. It was only the stopping of further harm. The children presented a different kind of weight. Doctors documented their conditions with clinical language, but the words felt insufficient. Deformities, cognitive impairment, developmental delay, labels that described outcomes without touching causes. Some of the children responded slowly to sunlight, to voices, to human touch. Others never did. Their world had begun in darkness, and the transition into freedom was not gentle. Caregivers spoke of progress in inches, not miles. Thorne read those reports carefully, knowing they would never be made public. The county funded their care quietly, as if money could offset responsibility. No one argued against it. Guilt has a way of making generosity feel mandatory. As months turned into years, the Rodenbeck case faded from public conversation. New disputes arose. New crimes demanded attention. Human memory, Thorne understood, was selective by necessity. To dwell too long on certain truths was to risk paralysis. Still, the case lingered in private spaces, in lowered voices, in unfinished sentences. Parents in nearby counties held their children a little closer. Some hollers grew more suspicious of outsiders. Others became more careful about what they ignored. The case had not cleansed the region, but it had disturbed it. Silence was no longer entirely comfortable. The burning of the cabin became a kind of unspoken agreement. Whatever remained there was not meant to be preserved. Ash was easier than acknowledgement. Thorne did know. Investigate because he did not need to. The structure had already served its purpose as evidence. What mattered had been removed, records copied, testimony secured. The rest was symbol. Fire does not erase history, but it gives people permission to stop looking at the place where it lived. The chimney that remained stood for years, a solitary reminder that something once occupied that ground. Eventually, even that weathered away. The ledger remained sealed, locked behind protocol and dust. Archivists who handled it did so with gloves and silence. Few ever requested access. Those who did were warned, not of danger but of content. Some records are not restricted because they threaten public order, but because they threaten comprehension. The ledger was one such object. It did not scream, it did not plead, it simply documented. Line after line of belief turned into action, action into repetition, repetition into doctrine. Thorne believed that was its greatest horror. Anyone could read it and understand exactly how it happened. There were no gaps, no mysteries left to solve. In time, Thorne retired. He left his office as he had kept it, organized, unadorned, precise. He took no souvenirs from his career, no plaques, no framed documents, only his notebooks, stored in plain boxes. Occasionally, younger clerks would ask him about the Rodenbeck case, having heard fragments, rumors. He answered briefly, factually, and never embellished. When asked how something like that could pen unnoticed for so long, he always gave the same response. It wasn't unnoticed, it was unchallenged. There is a difference people prefer not to examine. Black Mars Hollow remains on maps, though few visit. Nature has reclaimed much of the trail leading into it. Trees grow where fences once stood. Moss covers stones that marked property lines. From a distance it looks peaceful. It always did. That, perhaps, was part of the danger. Horror does not always announce itself with decay. Sometimes it wears cleanliness, sometimes it organizes itself, sometimes it believes it is right. The hollow does not feel cursed, it feels quiet. And that quiet is what lingers longest for those who know the story. The case taught the county an uncomfortable lesson. Law reacts. It does not anticipate. It waits for records, for witnesses, for proof that suffering has already occurred. By the time the law acts, damage is often complete. Thorne understood that more clearly than most. He never claimed the system had failed. He believed it had functioned exactly as designed. The failure belonged elsewhere, in the spaces where people chose not to ask, not to see, not to wonder why some doors never open from the inside. In the end, the Rodenbeck case did not redefine justice. It redefined vigilance. It stood as a reminder that isolation protects belief from challenge, and belief, when left unexamined, can harden into ritual. Ritual can excuse anything if repeated long enough. The record remains complete. Names, dates, outcomes preserved in ink. But the question it leaves behind has no official answer. How many other records are still being written, quietly, somewhere fog still settles thick enough to hide them?